just like haemophilia in as much as I bleed into joints and muscles, and I have to have injections of a missing blood factor called factor VIII to stop the bleeding. At the moment, I'm on what's called prophylaxis, which means that I have it twice a week to prevent bleeding.
To survive, you have to have blood brought to you, and you have to put it inside your body.
That's right, yeah.
Now, many years ago, we were importing blood to the UK.
That's right, yeah. I mean, prior to that, prior to the 80s, the blood in this country and all the different products from it, like plasma, all the different factors for people with bleeding disorders, it was sourced in England, and it was fine. But then in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, they started importing from America because we at the time we couldn't supply enough of our own. But unfortunately, the kind of blood they got from America was from very dubious sources, and it came mostly from prisoners because obviously they're paid out there. So, what do they care really? So all this blood came from prisoners, drug addicts, and most of it was infected with HIV and hepatitis C.
So, and that is a proved fact.
Yes,
that
it is.
Most of the blood coming from America that we were buying in the 80s was dirty blood.
Dirty blood, yes. That's why the group site was called Tainted Blood, because that's exactly what it was. It was tainted.
So the people with a similar disorder to you were injecting themselves with this tainted blood, this dirty blood, and catching HIV, were catching hepatitis when they were suffering with their own disorder in the first place, adding this on top of themselves.
That's right. That's exactly it. Yeah, you're receiving something in the hope that it'll make you better, or better that it'll stop that bleeding at the time, which it did. But then you're giving yourself something even worse, especially in the early 80s when there was no treatment. That's why thousands of us died.
You have to put a lot of trust, I guess, into the source you're getting. And I guess with all this blood coming across, people were desperate for it.
Well, that's right, yeah. I mean, I think at the time it was kept a bit quiet as to where this blood was coming from. And in actual fact, some of the consultants in America did actually send out warnings that, it wasn't a very good idea to be importing what was actually their blood. I mean, they did warn the British Isles, not to do it, but we still carried on doing it.
And at no point did the government of the time step in and say, well, we've actually got enough blood in the UK to support people. Why were we importing this? I mean, who was not stopping it happening?
That's a $64,000 question, isn't it? I think at the time Kenneth Clarke was the Minister for Health, and I think he's quoted as saying HIV does not cause AIDS. Well, it obviously does, but I don't know. I mean, loads of sort of documents were shredded at the time, so I don't know. I don't know why they still carried on importing it, even though it was infected. At the moment, we're still dying, principally from hepatitis C. I mean, some of the haemophiliacs were doubly infected. Some of them had HIV and hepatitis C. So it's a real double whammy. I mean, that is just dreadful. And yet there's been no compensation offered. Every single government has just washed their hands of us. And they just seem to they just don't care at all.
Tainted blood every government in power are approaching them and pushing again for this compensation for not many of you left, for the mistakes that were made.
That's right, yeah. In Ireland they had obviously a similar recurrence. I mean, it's happened all over the world. And they reached an agreement in Ireland, and last year when they had a debate in the House of Commons, it was hoped that a similar kind of result would be arrived at then. But unfortunately, it was thrown out by the whips. So again, we were back to square one, of absolutely no compensation and no recognition almost of what had happened. And although they all get up and say that they support us, when push comes to shove, they actually don't. Nobody wants to know.
Is there anything that can be done?
Yes, they could admit what happened, they could have an inquiry, and they could pay us appropriate compensation for what was their fault.
Would compensation be enough?
No, not really. No, it doesn't bring back the people that have died. I mean, some of these were young children. They were 7 years old, little boys. I mean, it was just absolutely appalling. No, it doesn't. It doesn't give you back your health. It doesn't give you back anything. But a lot of us are existing on benefits. And, families were torn apart. People were, there were widows with children to bring up, left fatherless and all sorts of things like that. And so, no, compensation doesn't, rectify that. But I think it's the least they can do under the circumstances, quite honestly.
The blood you're using today, the blood that many people are using across the UK, it's much more stricter now.
It is.
More.
Yes, it's safer now because it's heat treated. But having said that, there's still the sort of unknown danger of things like CJD in the blood supply.
You had to give up work last year.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
How does that make you feel? That
I don't know. Sad, really, because I always enjoyed work, and I started working when I was 17, and so I've worked for the 40 years of my life, and I certainly wouldn't have given up then had I not felt so ill. So, yeah, I feel sort of angry and sad, really, at the same time about it.
What do you plan for the future? What is your future?
I don't know, really. I don't know how much longer I have. I mean, I suppose nobody does, really. But, no, I don't really think of in terms of even a year ahead, actually.